Hello everyone, it's Matt here, and this is episode 2, or really episode 1, which is the start of the build. And this website, which is the New York, New Haven and Hartford Steam site, it's actually a Google site. It's fairly easy to find, and I'll pop a link in the description if I haven't already done that on the first video. But this site lists the Y2 and Y3 now. The Y2 is obviously the older design and not the one I'm interested in. It's this Y3 section, which is quite interesting. And this site is fantastic because there's so many differences in the photos in terms of like the pipe work on the tender. Sort of some of it's more straighter, some of it's bent more properly. You've got differences in smoke box door. In these two photos in particular, you've actually got a difference in the tender handrails. And these are both in the same year. And in actual fact, the one with the tender handrails, sort of on the coal section, is actually, if build date corresponds with running number, if sort of build dates and running numbers are in the same order, then the older loco actually is missing them where the new loco isn't. So, you know, is that to do with the fact that maybe there's a change because of electrification, maybe, or something like that? I'm not too sure. But you can also see this looks like one where it has possibly some overhead, but that might just be for like telecom wires and stuff like that. Or it might be lighting actually for the platform. Yeah, that would actually make sense. And, you know, there's quite a lot of variances in the photos, and it looks like that one's actually got lined edges to the foot sort of like walkways, and you know the others are in various states of cleanliness. You can sort of see some staining there, you know, and these photos are really good. It's a nice resource. There's so many different angles and stuff like that, so you can pick up a good portion of it. There's even different tenders as well, so you have the regular sort of tender with the sort of like slab sides here, and then you've got the more standard sort of USRA sort of design here, which might be a 10,000 gallon. I'm not sure. The USRA sort of did 8,000, 10,000, and I think it's 12,000 gallon. And finding pictures of the 8,000 gallon tender are nigh on impossible. 10,000 gallons, yes, plenty of them. 12,000, maybe a few, but 8,000, barely. There's a few. I've seen a few word references, and that's about it. But the good thing is here is that the Y3 is actually just a copy, almost, of the United States Railroad Administration 080 switch design. So, in actual fact, although the New Haven called it the Y3, it is effectively a USRA 080 switcher, which means that the photo resources I need to build it increase tremendously, because I'm now not restricted to searching for New Haven Y3 080 or New Haven Y3 switcher and that sort of stuff. And you know, even in some of these pictures, I can see there's a difference because this one's got Baker valve gear, and none of the other ones. You can sort of see this site refers to it as a cut back tender. But websites are only one thing, you know, and especially when dealing with historical stuff like this. And trying to build something old is to get as many photos as possible to sort of nail down some of the details. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't actually get sort of like the actual schematics of the tender, but what I have been able to do is actually get actual schematics of the loco. So you can sort of see here we have various schematic designs. So we have the front of the engine here, all the way on the left. And it sort of shows you like the schematics for distances between like the centre of the engine and the edge of the sort of like cylinder section, to the centre line of the cylinders, you know, the difference in height between the cylinders, the internal sort of diameter of the cylinders, and then you've got stuff like the extreme edges of the footboards, which is the same as the cab, and sort of like lovely little cross sections which show you like the sand domes, for example. So originally I said there was 2 domes. In actual fact, there's 3 domes, 2 sand, and then a regular steam dome. So you've got the sand dome on the left in the middle, and then the regular dome on the right. So you can sort of see there's actually a bit of a sort of flare out towards the top, which I'm not going to model. That's impossible in Lego scale, without some dubious work, I should say. I'd have thought, but you know, it's really easy to see the difference. So you can actually sort of make a difference and sort of see the scaling needed to actually get that sort of thing, so you can work it out from that. Also, you can see the pumps and that sort of stuff, so it's a really good resource to have this sort of thing. And not only do I have the cut through, I also have the overall schematic, so you can see here the height of the boiler. So it's got a slight sort of bell pear shape where it sort of peaks towards the middle. It actually peaks not fairly close to the smoke, sort of like the firebox, so there's not too much of a sort of like difference. So I'll imagine pretty much doing it as a straight top won't be too out. I mean, you can sort of see the difference really is probably going to be about an inch at most, I would have thought. There's not a great deal of difference overall in terms of the height, like an inch, possibly 2 inches at most. So that's not really something that in this sort of scale is actually going to make a difference. But pictures like this with all the schematic sort of like dimensions and that sort of stuff is quite good, because I can work out stuff like the difference between the wheels, like the wheelbase, the overall length, cab details and that sort of stuff. And pictures like this with all the details and the occasional bit of text on websites and in books and that sort of stuff means I can pull up stuff like this, which is sort of like the overall width. So for example, we know the width over the cab is 120 inches, so it's the maximum width of the engine, which represents 10 foot, which I'm going to say is 8 inches. So therefore one stud is equal to 1.25 feet or 15 inches. And it's good to bear in mind that all these dimensions are in inches or feet, because that's the sort of measurements they were working in those days. So you've got here 3/8 of an inch. I think there's somewhere there 3/4 there. I think I've seen 1/2 inches as well up there. So on the original diagram there's loads of these little bits, and obviously I'm not doing this to perfect scale, because it's Lego. It's not sort of HO scale or O scale gauge 1 or something even bigger than that, where I can go real down into the little nitty gritty details. It is sort of like a more sort of like coarse scale, so I'll build as much detail as I can into the model, but you know, there obviously are restrictions. So this little text document I've got here is actually something I've been working on, which sort of lists all the sort of like details. So obviously the first one is the width of the cab, so we know that we're setting it to at 10 foot is equal to 8 inches, and we're working out the scale there. I could go further than that and actually work out the precise scale I'm building to, but I'm going to leave it at that. And the scale itself is also a bit odd. I want to point this out because the track gauge of Lego is roughly 5 studs, or roughly to scale. So if you say, for example, that we are doing it to proper scale, and you're saying that the track gauge of the Lego, which is roughly 5 studs, is standard gauge, then that would mean that I'm building the Lego 10 studs wide, which it'd be fantastic for doing the valve gear, but then doesn't make the loco look right in that sort of perspective. So there are quite a few sort of like things like that. And the other thing as well is that if I'm doing this to scale, the wheels will be a lot thinner and the flange will be a lot less and that sort of stuff. So it's sort of having to, you know, little bits and pieces, and sort of like, yeah, maybe not quite perfect from a scale perspective. So we've got various sort of lengths on here. So length from the front beam edge to the end edge of the main superstructure, and that's actually this big sort of like 38 one here. Now I've said from front beam edge to end of the main superstructure. Well, what does that mean? And it's actually from the end of the board here to the end of the cab. And the reason I've gone for that length rather than overall length is that this overall length also includes the knuckle coupler here, and I don't want to include that yet. And the reason I don't want to include that is because that is a detail that I'm not too bothered about in terms of scale, because obviously I'm going to, if I do build this in the future, I'm going to be using Lego's magnetic couplers, so that sort of scale coupler thing is just like off to the side. It's not important. you know, it can be dealt with later if I do want to rescale it and possibly make it a bit more buildable. So that sort of thing there is actually a bit better. So it actually works out, if I take off this little 27 and 3/8, it roughly comes to 426 inches or 35.5 feet, which is 28.4 studs. So maybe upscale to 29. So I'm sort of already making scale adjustments to actually get it into a slightly more Lego-y sort of scale. So yes, it should round down to 28, but having an extra stud can make a hell of a lot of difference to the scaling. And in actual fact, and a lot of times in Lego, scaling it up, even when normal maths would say you'd scale it down, actually makes it better by scaling it up. So we've got the cab length here, and that is actually 66 inches. You can sort of see it here on this diagram, and 66 inches equates to 4 studs. So 4 studs long for a cab is ridiculously small, especially in Lego scale. So that's going to have to be a very delicate and very contrived build, and that's something that is going to be a bit of importance to try and get that correct. The cab overhang is 2.8 studs, and I said here again, like the other one, so 3 studs, and the cab overhang is actually this section here. So in between the main cab superstructure and the edge of the roof, how much extra do I have to go? And that's 42 inches. And this actual cab roof section with the slopes, I might have to use sort of like a mixerly joint sort of system, possibly. Remains to be seen what I can actually do in that sort of scale. Roof max length I've listed as 108 inches or 9 foot, and that's actually just 42 plus 66. Just to get the 108. It does actually extend beyond that slightly by about, I'd have said, maybe an inch, 2 inches, but I'm not too fussed about that as of yet. Besides which, there might be a bit of overhang anyway, and you might be able to actually use jumpers to actually offset the roof by that half a stud, and that half a stud is probably just enough to represent that nice overhang. So again, I've already, you know, it's a little bit, and it might not make a difference, but it might be enough to actually represent that. Got the boiler. Now the boiler is quite an interesting one, so I'll actually go back a page, and there is actually a scale dimension for the boiler in any of these schematics, which I think is a bit annoying, and I feel is a bit just like, why didn't you include one? You know, there's plenty. You could have done one on one of these two, for example. I mean, the cab is there, 120. We've listed it again here, so maybe that listed just the boiler would have been a bit better. It is nice to see that they've quadranted the schematic about the centre line of the boiler and the sort of loco. So they've centred it on the sort of like width of the loco, and then centred it on the boiler line. I think there's also sort of like lines at the bottom where they're sort of doing it against the crank pins or the possibly the axle and stuff like that, so it's really nice to see that. But again, width of the boiler would have been a nice touch. So I've sort of said that because of that, if you look at a comparison between the boiler and the foot plates and that sort of stuff, is that the boiler roughly works out to be about 6 studs. And 6 studs is a fairly realistic, I'd have said, sort of boiler size for this sort of loco. It gives you a 1 stud footplate walkway, which I think is fair enough from that sort of perspective. The drive between between drive wheel centers, so that is actually the 60 centimeters here. So between the center points of the axles on the loco, what are we looking at? And we're actually looking at just 4 studs. So that between the center of the wheel is not a lot at all. And I think it's important to point out that despite the big size of the 080, the wheels are actually really small because it's not designed to go at speed. It's designed for power and moving wagons and coaches around a yard, or cars I should say, around yards. So it's not designed to have high speed, it's designed to have power at low speed, and that's why you've got an absolutely massive boiler, large cylinders, and then tiny wheels in comparison compared to most locos, where even if you're doing a mixed traffic, you'd have them possibly about, I'd have said, 1.5 times the size of these, if not more. And again, between the first and the fourth axle, which is the wheelbase, which is 15 foot, which actually lists it here. So between the centre axle and the rear, so between the centre of the first axle and the centre of the rear axle is 15 foot. And that 15 foot also equates to where the wheels meet the rails as well. And it's important to point out here about how how tiny and how much force is actually put on from a loco to track, because all the weight of a loco is actually held on the wheels. And that's why you have like axle load and that sort of stuff, where it's really specific that you have to average out between a certain value. It doesn't always work quite like that. So I read somewhere that even though you might level it out so that the average, I don't know, is 10 tons a wheel or 10 tons an axle or something like that, it'll actually be slightly heavier on the main drive wheels and then slightly less on like the leading trucks or pony trucks and that sort of stuff, because obviously you want most of your weight on the drive wheel so they can get that adhesion. And obviously alright, so it doesn't actually have any leading or trailing wheels, so it's actually got most of that, all that force on those wheels, and that little slither of space per wheel that's actually touching the track is really tiny. So for stuff like this, the 15-foot wheelbase is actually really accurate to sort of say that it's that. So that 15 foot actually equates to just 12 studs. So that is saying between the first and the last one, sort of like the sort of distance between the first axle and the last axle should be 12 studs. So that is really tight. So I'm going to have to look into, from this perspective at least, aftermarket solutions for the wheels, because those are really small wheels. So some might be available. I do know there's a picture where I could compare them. But at the moment, I'm more focused on getting the research done and getting a good load of photographs and that sort of stuff. So, and speaking of photographs, I actually do have a few here. Some of these are from, for example, Wikipedia. Some of them are actually schematics from the USRA themselves, from people who have uploaded, and a few of them are like just general reference photos. So Wikipedia has this really nice photo of the USRA switcher. And obviously you've got certain details here which are easier to see, sort of like the roof line at the cab, for example. So you sort of see that it's actually quite a high pitched roof for the cab, and it's got quite good curvature to it, which might be hard to represent, but possibly not impossible. And it's paired with what looks to be a 10,000 gallon tender. And also we got like the schematic here, which actually is the front of the sort of tender as it curves round. So again, possibly not that useful to this loco, but possibly of use to another loco, or possibly even if I do a 10,000 gallon USRA model and the New Haven cut down version. So possibly doing that. And again, we've got some of these pictures. I think these are just off the New Haven Steam site. I downloaded them, so I've got a local copy, so in case I don't have the internet, I've still got sources. And this picture in particular is quite good because it actually allows me to use the scaling to actually work out how I should scale the tender. And again, I couldn't find drawings of the tender or roughly any scale measurements, but I can use pictures like this to actually work out the scale. And it's pictures like this here which also help because it shows me the opposite side, so there's actually an extra step there, so that people on this side can actually climb up and then climb up that ladder as well. You can see that the the ladder here, the handrail actually goes above and beyond on the right hand side of the ladder, because it's obviously centered, so get away with that sort of thing. And it actually is actually for view, because it actually helps keep this sort of side between the cold bunker and the edge of the tender clear, so you can actually, it's for sight purposes. And you can sort of see that the cab actually might have a little plate there to sort of help enclose it. I'll have to see if I can find some photos of the real thing to actually help see that in better detail. And you can also see that the tender handrail, so should I choose to model them, actually have a third point in the middle. So it's not just one at either end and then just straight, there's actually one in the middle holding it up as well. So it'll be interesting to see sort of that. And you can sort of see a bit more detail as well, with the lamp and that sort of stuff. So it's just quite a good reference photo from that perspective. Now, in terms of actual sort of things I can show you, I haven't actually got a lot done yet. A lot of it's just sort of like it's been sort of like working at the scale and that sort of stuff. But what I do have is this. Now, this is actually work on the tender. Now, this isn't perfect, and it's probably not to scale either, because that gap is actually probably too big. I did actually change it to be bigger. Looking at that photo, it's probably a bit too big now. So I might have to shrink that down a bit, but this is actually what I got for the tender so far. I've got a representation of the steps, so I could possibly shrink these down a bit. This is just using what I can. So again, like I said, it's actually the sort of underside is actually mounted to the trucks, so that's not too much of an issue. We've got the coupler mounted to the truck as well, so if I go on the hinge bit, and you can actually sort of see that these are hinged. Well, if it would work like that, so you can sort of see I've got quite a nice sort of rotation here, and that should enable it to rotate around corners and that sort of stuff. It's probably easier to use this, so you can sort of see I've got enough. We'll have to excuse the overheight sort of hand sort of like step support there, because Lego don't actually do custom flex tube lengths, so this is just to represent that. So once it's cut down a bit, I think it'll be better. It's not perfect solution because there's a little gap here, so where the main sort of coupler is compared to the main, there's actually a dip. I'm not too fussed about that. It's really tiny, but it is something that isn't perfect, but at least nevertheless it is there. The bogie designs are not final. This is pretty much just a copy of the standard BMR bogie design, with the offsets. A really nice technique, and I've copied that, but I'm changing it around to sort of represent the sort of like spring here. I was actually going for sort of like a double cheese wedge originally, but that was too little in terms of depth, and you didn't have enough relief detail, so it didn't match sort of like the height of the sort of like the how far out the what would be the bearings would come out to. And you can sort of see that that's pretty much equal. So I'm going to have to tinker around with the sort of this sort of thing and work out how to do it properly. I might be able to find some sort of magical guidance online, or might even have to go through a different bogie design altogether, and might actually go regress and use an older tender style for the bogies or something like that. But this is all I've got at the moment, so it's just sort of like blocking out work, if you like, so blocking out the length and that sort of stuff. And here are some sort of backup wheel sets, so should I need to copy them, there's some there as well, so one for left, one for right. But anyway, that's it for this sort of like quick update. So obviously there's a lot of thought going into how to scale it and that sort of stuff, but that's it for now. And I'm going off and doing a bit more tinkering and that sort of stuff. So I think the next episode is actually going to be working on the loco and sort of trying to scale that out. So that's it for the moment, and hopefully there'll be an update on this coming up real soon. So see you later.